Hi, welcome back. This is Kavita Parmar for Love Thy Work. So as we go on this wonderful journey of talking to other people who I know around me who love what they do, I thought I would share some thoughts I had the other day with you guys. A few months ago, I was invited to go to IFAM. IFAM is the International Folk Art Market, one of the largest folk art markets in the world, I think, and have been going strong for many, many years. I've been to this market a few times. I've been invited to show my work. I've been invited to go and give a talk. And this time I was going to showcase my work with the Madras weavers. And as I'm at the market, which was really quite an opportunity to go and show what I do, and also right after XTANT, which is always such an incredible parenthesis in my life, it was a good thing to go and be at a fair where I was just being one of the people showing their work and not the person organizing it. You enjoy it in a very different way. You get time to see other people, speak to them. So I'm very grateful to be invited there and to be part of it. What is also really stunning about the market is the way everyone is dressed, because of course everyone tends to wear their local dress. And so when you walk around, that is one of the things that always strikes me, how gorgeous this world is when everyone is dressed a little bit representing their culture, where they come from. You get to see the real diversity that is there, a glimpse of it at least. But then, of course, when you finish the show and you go back to the hotel, or there's another event happening afterwards, or people just get together for lunch or dinner, everyone pretty much changes back to their normal gear. And that always sort of makes me feel a little bit sad, because it feels like it was just all theatre. And then when we go back to normal life, it feels like a bit more dreary and drab, and the usual blacks, greys, blues come about, and the usual brands that we all know, mostly made out of plastic, is what most people end up wearing, no matter where they come from. But there is one human being who always, well, there's more than one, but one that I know really well, who's always wearing exactly the same outfit that he wears at the fair, and that's Shamji. Shamji is an incredibly important human being for me and for XTANT as a community, because we hold him as quite the example, an exemplary of what we would like the future of craft and artisanship to look like. Not only because of the way we think about him, but it's also the way he thinks about himself and the work he does and the community he comes from, and how he wants the future of it to be. He's somebody who I find to be quite visionary and quite grounded at the same time. So Shamji always dresses with the clothes that he makes, his community makes. It very much represents and shows where he comes from. The cotton he's wearing is the cotton that grows in that community, which is a very special kind of cotton that grows with rain water, making it quite sustainable naturally. They hand spin, hand weave, and they even dye the clothes themselves, and every single piece that he wears is actually hand stitched. So real luxury. And it looks beautiful on him, the way he carries it with such pride. So anyway, we were all, together having dinner, pretty relaxed, and someone made a comment, which is quite obvious and happens quite a lot, of saying how incredibly elegant he looked. And of course he smiled and said, well, you were looking really good earlier. Why did you change? And so it was in a teasing, nice, gentle way, he was sort of chiding this person who comes from India as well, who was, it's true, at the fair, beautifully dressed in clothing from their area, and was now, of course, totally differently dressed in the typical sort of, sweatpants or something like that. And I felt it was really sweet and gentle the way he sort of brought that up. And the gentleman replied back, because it's a lot more comfortable. And Shamji said, okay, so for me as well, this is a lot more comfortable. And then the conversation started to go on about how we've stopped wearing our clothes from where we come from, and how all of this has become quite globalized. And, maybe comfort is a thing that we talk about, that's what these clothes give. But in reality, it's not that comfortable. In fact, later on when I put this video up, I'm going to link a video I just watched of Alan Watts, the brilliant Alan Watts, talking about how wonderful regular clothes like kimonos and sarongs are great and much more comfortable than the pants that men wear. It's a fun video, and Alan Watts was always a delight to listen to, so I highly recommend it. Anyway, coming back to the point, so we started discussing about why people in these villages where they come from, whether it was this gentleman who was the head of that community or other people who actually make these beautiful clothes that they were brought there, were not wearing the clothes that they make. And that conversation got very interesting, because then we started talking about the fact that they don't wear it. And the real reason actually that came up was because they can't afford them. Most of these fibers are very special, it takes a long time to make, the natural dyes, the hand weaving processes, that it was just, they couldn't afford to wear the clothes they make. And for a moment that really struck me. I mean, it's something I guess we all know, it's obvious, but it struck me because it reminded me of when I was a child growing up, and I would go to the village where my grandparents were from. And I remember looking around that village. I have such sharp memories of the fact that it was such a foreign and interesting world as opposed to mine, because there was really nothing in common in terms of textures and materials, that everything that I saw in the village was handmade. It was beautifully carved. There was a story behind it. It was mostly, a lot of times, even repaired. There's a beautiful word in India called jugaad. So when something stops working, they add extra to it. And that extra addition was always done with beauty. It was always done with some local skill. And I remember that making an impression on me. And now, over these last 20, 30 years of my life, that I've gone back to that village or other villages where I've had the luck to go and explore and learn, I notice how everything is becoming less beautiful. There's more and more plastic. There's more and more cheaper materials, easily made. Of course, synthetic dyes are everywhere. And in a way, I thought, wow, it's so sad, because in some way, as these people are getting more involved with the global economy, and we're trying to make craft, and craft's becoming a luxury and is getting recognized, the hands that make it, the people who make it, the people whose generational skill gives us this beauty, seem to be the ones losing it in their own surroundings. I've been in places where these villagers will sell their grandparents' pieces, or pieces that have belonged to their family generationally, because the truth is that craft, that color, that fabric probably no longer is being made. We've gone, what is available now is actually much poorer in quality, because we're more aware of time and we want to make it faster, even in the craft world. It's incredible when you think around the fact that how we are in some way siphoning off beauty from these places where it was something very natural to them, something that its materials that belong in and around them. Everything that they make is made from their own hands. And now things are coming to them from very far away, much cheaper apparently. Then you have to question that as well. What does that cheap mean? How that actually does not include the real price of things. And then, of course, how poor this thing is becoming, their surroundings are becoming. In fact, I remember last year I had the opportunity to go to Benin, and what was so magical and beautiful about Benin was that none of the big brands have arrived there yet, because maybe it's just too small a country for them to bother with it still. So you'd go into the country and look around, just everywhere. People were so beautifully dressed. Not a single human being was wearing the same thing someone else was wearing. The city was full of tailors, so was the countryside. There were no big brands, there was no big banners. There were just little tailor shops everywhere, men and women. And it was lovely, because these are these little hole-in-the-wall spaces, and it said couturier. And because, in Benin, they speak French. And people would just go and buy material and then go there and get an outfit made. And everybody was dressed beautifully, because clothes were made to fit them. And I felt that was so rich and beautiful. And I could feel, and I was feeling quite sad that I'm probably, the next time I go back to Benin, that will change. Big brands will come in, or leftovers, which is even worse, of big brands that get shipped into these countries and then gets sent back as aid, and then actually kills the local tailor's business because it's so cheap that the local tailor obviously can't even make a living cutting and sewing something to your size. So then everyone starts wearing these leftovers from our world, which is another way in which we're polluting. Not only are we sending back trash, we're also sending back clothes we wear once or twice with no regard, and then they end up in these marketplaces where people from this country wear them because they're so cheap, but have a total disconnect with them, have nothing to do with their life, their work, or how they look upon themselves. And now, of course, with social media and younger people having access to that, they think it's cooler to have a sportswear brand, and they want to look like that. They think that is what success looks like, or that's what's cool. And they themselves are pushing back and not wearing what traditional clothing was in that place. Here again, I'm not trying to say that people should only dress in traditional clothing, that there should be no innovation or change. Again, who am I to tell some young kid to decide what to wear? But you wonder why those choices are given, and are they real choices? You wonder if they really had access to all the information, what choice would they really make? In some way, it was really beautiful in Benin to witness something that you rarely get to witness in the world today, because even when I go to remote parts of India or Mexico, sometimes you get to see people wearing the same things that we wear everywhere. In fact, I was having a conversation with another colleague who mentioned to me that in Mexico, sometimes in museums or government buildings, people who wear their traditional clothing are not allowed in because to them, formal is what we have put onto them, a suit or a pant or something that's so foreign to who they are. It's interesting that way of being colonial still exists, and it's so incredibly imposed that it ends up being self-imposed by countries who are no longer ruled by someone from outside. But we've taken in these values because that's what's shown everywhere. So now suddenly the right way to dress is the way we dress in the West. It's the more formal way to dress. I mean, I talk about that many times when you look at even the weddings now in remote places where people do their traditional wedding, but they also do the Christian wedding because that's what they've seen. And so lots of more of these polyester plastic white dresses are being made by people somewhere where it's so foreign to their culture, but they find it cooler because that's what the dominant culture does. It's super interesting how, of course, having social media, having all this access to information also in some way is affecting and making homogenous cultures in very remote places. That's something we need to be very careful with. How could we bring more diversity back into the world, and hopefully back into the way we look on the streets? And that's something that I love at IFAM. When you go there during the market, there's this picture that we all do, that we come together and they take a shot. It's always so beautiful because you'd never see two people dressed alike. And you see such wealth of fiber, texture, technique that it is really joyous to watch. And hopefully the world will go in that direction. So I think that's something that people like us who work in craft and who are so obsessed with and also want to make sure this goes on for the future. We want to in some way revive it and take care of it for the future. We need to worry about how can we make sure that we give beauty back to them as well, or at least allow them the space to create beauty for themselves as well. Make them even more aware. Sometimes it's interesting. It's that the generation that we're working with has so lost touch with the way things were before that they also need to be in some way reminded. Very quickly, that gentleman understood exactly what Shamji was saying, and his eyes lit up. And I remember I said to him, do the women who make your pieces, do they wear natural dyes, and do they wear fabrics that are made by them? And he immediately said, no, they don't. And once again, why don't they do it? Of course, it's more easier to wash a polyester sari, apparently, because they don't have time to wash the other one. Or I think the real honest truth is that it takes time to make the other one, and time is money, and it was more expensive. And now, since whatever they were getting paid was being used for paying their subsistence lifestyle, they thought of what their parents, their grandparents would live with on a daily basis now as a luxury that can only be afforded by someone who lives very far away. Yes, by giving work and working with them, we're making sure a skill survives. That's wonderful. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But what can we actively do to make sure that they have access to their own work? I think it's so important to be able to use things you make, because I think it makes your own relationship with what you make completely different, so that it's not such a foreign thing that you're making something that you're never going to use, and you see it as something that goes through your hands, which is, the number of hours that takes to make some of these things. So the amount of time this human being is living with this piece, and then they have no relationship of a lived life with it, is quite sad. So I think that, we who work in craft, I think at least we should be very aware of what is happening and how we can make a change in the way we talk about these things with the people we work with, and encourage them and make it possible for them to wear the clothes they make. Can we in some way collaborate and make fiber available to them so they can spin and weave what they make, or help them, with things, with whatever's left over from our production. And also in many ways remind them how cool it is, just like when we look at Shamji, or when I was in Benin, how cool it was to see people express really who they are and not fall into the trap of this global idea of what cool is, which is imposed by very few very wealthy companies, and generally made from very cheap, terribly made materials that have huge impact on human lives and, of course, on the environment. And I think it's a responsibility that we have, that the way we look at them and how we talk about them, it also, and they always say that one thinks of oneself in the eyes of the other, so it is our job to do that, not only just take away from them what is theirs and beautiful and buy it off them, but also make sure that they are able to wear it, use it, live with it, and hopefully in that way make it even more powerful and allow it to continue.